lots and lots to get through today, so I'm not going to take up any more time. I'm going to hand over to Tracy first, and then she's going to hand over to Mel later on. Thank you both.
Thanks, Hannah. Morning, everyone. It's great to be here with you this morning. I'm Tracy Jackson, Head of Early Years at Save the Children UK, and I'm going to talk briefly about our work across the UK before handing over to Mel, who's going to provide that overview of our work in Wales. So many people associate Save the Children with our global work, but we've been working in the UK since the 1920s, securing breakthrough for children that are now part of our DNA of our society. And these include free school meals and children being treated as children within the criminal justice system. In 2021, that means working hard to make sure children in the UK grow up in families which have enough money to live with dignity, and children can play and learn in those vital early years. So our goal is to secure long-term sustainable changes in policy and practice in every nation of the UK. We know that the first few years of a child's life are crucial, a period which offers the greatest opportunities for learning and development, and one that can affect the rest of their lives. But unfortunately, poverty damages those vital early years of childhood, a time when the foundations are being built for children's future learning, and when the impact of poverty on learning can be the most devastating. By the age of 3, the average child from a low-income family is up to 17 months behind those from wealthier families. And this gap gets wider and wider as those children age. And by 16, only 24% of disadvantaged students get good exam results, and that's compared to around 50% of other pupils, which of course impacts on employment and earning potential, making it difficult for those young people to break the cycle of poverty. So given the impact poverty has on children's outcomes, we're deeply concerned that even before the pandemic, around 4.2 million children were living in poverty across the UK. And we know that this is intensified by the pandemic. One of the main ways that poverty influences young children's outcomes is how it affects parents' ability to create those conditions in which children can learn best. Poverty limits children's play, and therefore it limits children's learning. Parents living in poverty are often time poor, limited time to offer play opportunities to their children, and exclusion from high quality early years play experiences for disadvantaged children further deepens inequalities in learning. Limited home environments and a lack of play material in homes can deny children the variety of play they need. In areas of deprivation, we know that areas safe places to play are also limited, and they're not safe due to antisocial behaviour or environmental dangers. Some families don't have the confidence, the knowledge and skills that will help to support their children's development. And struggling on a low income creates stress and anxiety, and this makes it harder for parents to stay engaged with their children's learning. But what we also know is that parents absolutely want to do the best for their children. And when parents have enough money, the knowledge, the skills and the confidence to provide the kind of relationships, quality interactions and experiences that children need in their early years, this has tremendous potential to reduce the way in which poverty impacts on children's life chances. Therefore, our work across the UK continues to fight for families on low income, reducing poverty and the stress associated with it. But we're also focusing on supporting parents to play and learn with their children, both at home and through settings, ensuring that early years policies and services are improved by really listening to children and families, developing evidence and sharing learning about interventions and approaches that reduce the impact of poverty on children's early learning, identifying the practice and the policy change needed for children to achieve their potential. So I'm going to focus a little bit more on the detail about what we're doing to support families at home. We understand more than ever how important and how much those vital early years matter for children. The period between pregnancy and 3 years is increasingly seen as a critical period in shaping children's life chances. And this is based on evidence of brain formation, communication, language development, and the importance of secure relationships on children's social and emotional development, and subsequently their mental health. We know that if children are to feel ready to learn, they must feel safe and secure. Parents are by far the most important influence in a child's early learning and development. The nurturing and responsive interactions that take place between parents and children create safe and secure conditions for children to confidently explore the world and develop the foundational skills for learning. Those secure, responsive relationships between parents and children are consistently associated with better outcomes for children, particularly in the early years. Unleashing this power is vital for children, but particularly for those growing up in poverty. So over the next 3 years, we will be working closely with partners, children and families who are able to empower families who experience multiple kinds of disadvantage, where we aim to build the evidence based on how financial support to reduce hardship, together with effective parental support in the home, can lead to better outcomes for children. But we're also supporting families through settings. We know that confident, skilled practitioners are essential elements of successful parental engagement and support. We've got lots of learning and experience from our work with partners and from research that has taken place over several years. For instance, we know that intensive parenting programs delivered in early years settings by skilled professionals can be an effective way of supporting parents. But we also know that the system can't afford to sustain those intensive programs at the scale needed to make a difference in the gap in attainment. Therefore, we're going to be delivering parental engagement programs such as our Families Connect program, but ensure that those are part of a wider approach to improve the skills, awareness, competence of the workforce, or think about how can programs like Families Connect act as a catalyst to support settings to embed parental engagement, which can be built into schools and nurseries in a sustained way and which can be easily replicated. But we also know that there's not one single program or approach that can deliver the improved outcomes required to achieve our mission. Improving child outcomes in the early years depends on an effective local system of support, children and their families, and this requires long-term funding and a multi-dimensional approach. It requires community-led services where parents feel safe, accepted, they feel connected and are able to ask for help and are supported by a well-functioning system. And that includes arrangements for clear strategy and planning, leading change, delivering effective support and evaluating progress in the early years. And through our work in early learning communities, we're working to strengthen the evidence base about what an effective parental support system looks like and how we can achieve it. We're also going to be focusing on learning about how better outcomes can be sustained for the long term, even after our investment in a partnership ends. We'll draw on the learning from our work and partners and what matters to families, children and parents across the UK to advocate for greater investment in early years. In all 4 nations, we'll work together with our partners in the sector, aiming to connect people to create a clear and compelling case for early years investment. But we know fundamental to the success of our work is embedding our work in local communities, working alongside our partners and sharing power with children and families. And that's when I'm going to hand over to Mel, who's going to talk about how this strategy looks in Wales and the work that we're going to be doing, in Wales.
Thank you, Tracy. Seamlessly going into my slides. Bore da, good morning, everybody. My name is Melanie Simmons, and I'm the head of Save the Children in Wales. As Tracy has already said, our mission across the UK has two elements, though very much linked. The first part is to make a sustainable reduction in the number of children growing up in poverty, and secondly, to narrow the early learning gap between children living in poverty and their peers. For the next 10 minutes, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we know about child poverty in the early years in Wales, and then what the team in Save the Children in Wales are currently working on. I'm sure everybody here today is very aware that the child poverty situation in Wales is stark, to say the least. We now have the worst child poverty rate of all the UK nations, with around 1 in 3 children living below the poverty line. And even before the pandemic, that was almost 200,000 children living in poverty in Wales. And we know that this figure is set to rise as a result of the past 18 months. Oh, sorry. I knew that I wouldn't be able to get through this without having a little bit of a technology hiccup. Sorry about that. OK, so sorry about that. The most recent data has shown us in every local authority across Wales, at least 1 in 5 children is growing up in a household that doesn't have enough money to cover the basics. And obviously, these numbers can increase significantly in areas of high deprivation. So in terms of what this looks like for our youngest children, data shows us that children aged 0 to 4 are most likely to live in income deprivation compared with other age groups of children and adults. This is around 50,000 children in Wales. It is important to note that there's a government in Wales that is publicly committed to wanting to improve the lives of children living in poverty. We were the first country in the UK to legislate to give due regard to the UNCRC when exercising all its functions. Soon after, we saw the introduction of the 7 core aims for children, with 2 specifically relating to child poverty and the early years. And the Welsh Government's stated ambition to provide every child with the best possible start in life means that the Welsh Government clearly recognised the importance of the early years on future life chance of children in Wales. And there are several promising initiatives in place, including Flying Start, the First 1,000 Days, the Early Years Integration Programme or Pathfinder, and the Nest Framework, to name just a few. However, there is clear evidence from our work in local communities that there can be issues around coordination, shared understanding of the various government programmes, which can lead to confusion, duplication, and tragically, families with the best will in the world are still falling through the gaps. In 2019, the Welsh Government launched a plan that was welcomed by many in Wales. The plan is to create a single high-quality child-centred approach to early childhood education and care, or ECEC as it's also known. The development of this ECEC approach in Wales is key to addressing the coordination and local implementation of the national commitments made by the Welsh Government. It would also offer support and much needed recognition of our incredible parenting workforce, giving them the training and resources they need to effectively engage with and support parents as they tackle the crucial but often challenging early years of a child's development. So I'm going to talk a little bit more now about what our small team in Wales, how we're contributing to and supporting this integrated approach to mitigate the impact of poverty on children in the early years. I say contributing because this isn't something that can just be done by one single organisation, one single intervention, a sector or one policy. We're all part of the system that has a potential to make a positive and sustainable change for children growing up in poverty. Because we're a relatively small team in Wales, we focus our work in our communities working closely with a number of locally based partners. We work with these partners, including parents and children, with a view to co-design and innovate sustainable solutions and look for regular opportunities to share any learning and evidence in order to influence wider local and national change, whether this be practice or policy. So we talk about our approach being roughly split into 2 pillars of work that we call demonstrating the how and sharing the what. I'll give a little bit of an explanation about what I mean by those, but then I'll move on to talk and give some examples to hopefully demonstrate what those things mean. So when I talk about demonstrating the how, I mean what we're working on within our local partnerships. Within these partnerships, we're aiming to show how a local system can work together differently to have an impact for children and families in the early years. The specific elements to this work are alleviating immediate material needs in the home, co-design with children and families, and providing evidence based on local data and insights from community. Sharing the what is about what we do with what we learn in our partnerships. An example of this is in 2 local authorities that we're working in, we coordinate communities of practice. These communities of practice brings together schools and early years practitioners who work with parents. Attendees have told us that they really value the time together to share good practice, coordinate delivery in their local area and give each other peer support. What we do then from being able to coordinate those groups is we're able to share the issues that are raised with local and national decision makers. And we also use those groups as expert advisors as new policy and practices are developed. Other examples of what we learn from our partnerships is the lived experience of poverty, what's important to children and families in their communities, and what solutions are working already and what can be replicated on a wider scale. So before we finish, I'm just going to give you some examples of the projects that we're currently working on in Wales. There's 3 of them, and the first one I'd like to talk a little bit about is in Newport, in a community called Betys, where we're currently testing a local systems change project, the Betys Early Learning Community. So this model was developed to improve the learning outcomes of children growing up in poverty within a local community. It's based on the principles of the Harlem Children's Zone model in the US, with similarities to the recent Welsh Government pilot initiative, Children First. We've been working alongside partners in education, health, the local authority, housing and the third sector in Betys since 2019, with the aim to bring together the whole system relevant to children's early learning and development. Over the next 3 years, the partnership will be working on a shared strategy they've developed, which sets out clear priorities and work streams to address the identified need. The pandemic has been a real stress test of the approach in Betys, which was really still very new in March 2020. There have been some real successes in how the partners have worked together to quickly respond to the needs of children and families during the time of crisis. For example, quickly identifying families in immediate need and distributing essential items such as food parcels, hygiene packs and digital devices for learning. One of the focuses of this piece of work in the new year is to share some of our learning so far and also bring together other local systems change approaches across Wales to look at challenges and share good practice. The second area that we're focusing on is looking at how best practice around transitions from early years settings into education. So we know that the transition between early years settings and primary schools is frequently raised as an area of concern amongst partners working in areas of deprivation. We hear that progress to engage and support families through early years provisions such as Flying Start can be lost when children move into a school setting. And parents have often told us that they feel anxious and lack confidence to engage with children's education in nursery or school. This project has been developed organically based on the relationships we've had in the communities and a mutual recognition of the opportunity to improve the transition into education. We're currently working with schools and partner organisations in Cardiff, Neath Port Talbot, Newport, Rhondda-Cynon-Taf and Carmarthenshire to support the innovation and development and evaluation of different transition approaches. We're conducting the research alongside Professor Janet Goodall and Swansea University, with the view next year to create an insights piece on best practice in the early years transition. And the final bit of work that I'd like to talk about is about how we're trying to understand what helps parents with children's development in the home. Similar to from the evidence base that Tracy's covered earlier on, that we know that the evidence shows us that often the basic material needs of a family need to be met before further support can be effectively given and received. So providing material items such as a bed, a washing machine, a pram or a cooker can help to alleviate some of the barriers created by poverty, such as stress and financial burden. During the pandemic, we were able to offer emergency grants to families in need. This offer was delivered through local partners and also allowed us to provide basic early learning resources. The partners were able to use this initial contact and opportunity to build their relationships with families and help assess and refer to additional community support. As we heard about earlier, when a family's immediate material needs have been met, they have appropriate resources and support within the home, it can help to create conditions where development and learning can happen. However, we also know that provision of resources alone doesn't address the root causes and systematic inequalities that push families into poverty, nor do they provide parents with the confidence, skills or knowledge they sometimes need to engage in their children's learning. What we're working on with partners in 2 local authorities will hopefully help us to understand more about the impact of addressing material deprivation on parents' capacity to support their children at home, and through co-design with small groups of parents, what approaches work for them to support their children at home. So just to finish and open up to questions, we know that the political commitment is there at a national level, and we've warmly welcomed a string of recent financial commitments, including those to support families living in poverty through the Winter Fuels Support Scheme. We're also pleased to see the pledges in the recent cooperation agreement to offer all primary age children free school meals and to extend access to the childcare offer to 2-year-olds, although we will be keen to ensure that this access is for 3-year-olds crucially gets extended to non-working parents. In light of these recent commitments, our focus continues to be to make sure that the families we work with get to see the real impact of these policies through improved qualities in their day-to-day lives. We'll continue to work with a range of local and national partners to ensure there's better coordination, clear about accountability and transparency around policy and investment for children in the early years, and to ensure that the voice of practitioners, our youngest children, as well as parents and carers, is at the heart of policy and decision making. Diolch yn fawr iawn, thank you. And now we've got some time for questions.
Thank you both, Tracy and Mel. Well, you've gone super fast through that, so we've got plenty of time for questions. Before we do move on to questions, is there anything further that you want to share, Tracy, on some of the learning across the UK that Wales perhaps can learn from here? Is there anything you didn't cover? That would be great, just to sort of expand a little bit on that for us. Thank you.
So we talked about obviously the early years evidence framework. So we create a strategic framework across the UK, which has drawn together the latest evidence and research and learning from children and families across the UK. And we'll continue to build on that and share learning. So all of the work that Mel's just spoken about, the work in our systems change work across the UK, we're looking at other organisations, what national approaches is happening to systems change, and drawing that learning and evidence together so that we can share that with the Wales team, and Wales can build on that but also contribute and share. So there's a real importance of building evidence, learning, working with our partners and sharing that learning across the UK. Lots and lots of synergy across the UK with the work that we're doing. And so the early years framework sets out a broad review of all of the evidence about best practice in early years, what we know from the evidence, but also where are the gaps, what we don't know, what do we need to still learn about, and how do we need to develop, what evidence do we need to develop, and what learning is missing. So very much focusing on where are those gaps across the UK and how can we share learning. One of the things that we're really keen to do is make sure that in all of our work, that children and families are at the centre of that co-design in research, gathering evidence, and making sure that the work that we do is very much developed by the people who are going to use those services and approaches, but also by the people who are going to be delivering them, to make sure that they are sustainable, but also they work for children and families. Just a couple of questions, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy, for expanding on that. You've talked a few times, both Tracy and Mel, talked about that involvement of parents in the design and the delivery of the programmes. I don't know if you can expand a little bit more on that, about the parental involvement and the child's involvement, if the child's voice is heard and their views are involved in the work that you're doing. That would be great to hear a bit more on that.
If I just sort of start by thinking about just talking about the overview, and then Mel will be, I'm sure, be able to share some specifics. Save the Children within the UKI, we chair the National Participation Forum, and that enables us to bring lots of expertise together to think about some of the challenges and some of the best practice. So we obviously develop that and bring that into our work in Wales. And one of the things, obviously my background is early years, so I'm really keen and particularly keen to make sure that those very young children's voices are heard, particularly in service design. And I think one of the key things for us is to use data to understand whose voices is being heard, who's missing from that conversation. who's taught, you know, where are those missing voices, and which organisations are working with those children and families to make sure the most marginalised, most disadvantaged children have that voice. But we also need, when we're planning our work, to build in the time it takes to build those relationships. We know that we can't do effective participation and co-design with children and families on our own as an organisation. You know, we need to work closely with our partners who hold those trusting relationships with children and families. So we bring in the theory, the expertise, the tools around how to do that work well, and then we combine that with our work in local communities who work closely with those children and families and hold those relationships. And I'm going to pass over to Mel, who will talk a little bit more about what that looks like in Wales.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think it's really keen to say, and I know there's some of the Wales team on the call today, that you know, participation and involving voices of children and young people is really, we're really passionate about it, and it's the core of everything we do. And the work that I've started to talk about today is probably good to say that a lot of that's in the initial stages, but talking to young people to build in their voices is integral to it. So way back when, actually, way before COVID, which seems like a million years ago now, we started looking at where we were talking about the support in the home as around a home learning environment. People might know that, would be familiar with that phrase. And we were really fortunate to work with some Fly and Start settings in Newport, where we went and did some workshops with very young children on what they like in their house, what they like doing, and it was a fantastic opportunity to really see how, regardless, you know, you can have 3-year-olds that are really capable of telling you how they would like to learn and play and develop with their families at home. So we build that kind of conversation in with all the bits of work that we're doing. And an example of one that we're currently working on is our transitions to primary, where we are going in and the young people that are part of that transition project, and also other young people within that same school that can reflect on what is good, you know, what they want. And I think I was speaking to one of my colleagues yesterday, one of the lovely comments from one of the 4-year-olds that said they were nervous when they were joining school was because they didn't know what their teacher looked like. And, you know, building in that understanding and really taking it back to what's really important for children and these key points in their life is really important. And like I said, we embed that kind of conversation and those approaches with every bit of work that we're doing, and always, you know, we can always improve on it, and we can always bring in more ideas and exciting opportunities to engage more children and young people. But we absolutely start with that when we're starting bits of work. Does that answer what you said? I feel like I've gone off on a bit of a soapbox then about.
No, that's brilliant. I mean, obviously Children in Wales are hugely passionate about that too, so it's fantastic to hear more about that. And we're doing one piece of work at the moment. We are trying to gather parents and carers' views kind of on how they are heard, both in the local community. So some of the projects you've talked about sounds like parents have got that opportunity to be heard. So we're at the moment doing a questionnaire to find out their views on how they're heard locally, but also nationally, how they can feed up to kind of wider policy development in Welsh Government. So hopefully there'll be a bit of a link in the chat so people can be aware of that. So if you can help me share, kind of reach out to as many parents as possible, because as we're hearing today, it's so important that we do involve parents and carers in all the work we do, because their voice is so strong. They are the ones that are going through this. Their lived experience is so important and can have